Alan, thank you so much for spending some time with me today to go over some really important aspects of communication. I would kind of love to start out with just how you got to what you're doing today. I know you're quite popular and famous around the world with NVC, but after you learned NVC, if I understand correctly, you kind of had to learn the whole entrepreneur gambit in order to be able to market yourself out in the world. How was this for you, and what lessons have you learned?
Yeah, so without getting into the whole story, after I completed my self-directed sabbatical in 2005, I had a lot more tools under my belt, so to speak, to share with people, but I didn't know how to make a living. So that's when I got my first business coach, and that's when I started enrolling in business courses, marketing courses, publishing courses, and I over-enrolled in way too many things. And
What year was this?
that was 2006.
Nice.
And yeah, I really had to learn from scratch, basically how to do it. I mean, before that time, marketing was a four-letter word for me. I really didn't like it, and now I've done a 180 on marketing, and I consider myself a little bit of a marketing geek. And I really see how true marketing is really about empathy, and it's about being of service. So several years later, it was about 2010, 2011, people started approaching me for business coaching, which at first I found bizarre, but these were friends of mine who were seeing what I was doing in my business, and they were asking me for free advice. They started to feel uncomfortable asking for free advice. And so I was able to put together a curriculum based on the best things I found in different places. So, one particular teacher, I really liked how he described launches versus releases when you're talking about online marketing. Another teacher really nailed it in terms of how to find your life purpose and how to create that larger context that you want your business to fit into. And somebody else did really well on how to find your niche. So I ended up synthesizing my own curriculum that's in about 9 steps for starting a business from scratch. So now I have thousands of subscribers. I've got clients on every continent except Antarctica. And the business still hits bumps, and there's still the cash flow roller coaster that entrepreneurs go through. But all the indicators have been positive, and the testimonials my clients give me are just mind blowing. And so, yeah, marketing is essential as our sales, and also for a lot of people in my tribe, reframing business and money are just important things that need to be reframed, because so many of us have an adversarial relationship with money.
Definitely. Like we in last week's lecture, we covered how to change sales from being a dirty little word to really understanding what the meaning of it is, and the
Yeah,
value exchange that can take place with
yeah,
integrity. Can you
absolutely.
speak a little bit about that?
The audience that I work with does not have a demographic. It has 2 psychographics, and these show up as deep commitments that these people have in their lives. So one of the commitments is to leave the world a better place than they found it. The other commitment that my audience has is that they're working on their own personal growth and development. So, and what I offer them are best practices for how to live in harmony within ourselves, with each other, and with the planet. So if what you have to offer benefits people, if what you have to offer is like medicine for the world, then you almost have an ethical imperative to become good at marketing. And the sales portion is when you've been able to lay out for the other person how their needs are going to be met when they interact with your offering, how it could really benefit them, or how it could be a win-win. And that sales portion is when you enter into this mutually beneficial agreement. And it's not about the type of selling that our culture is so used to, which is that we're encouraged to buy things we don't even need with money we don't even have in order to impress people we don't even like. So it's not that angle. It's really being of service. Most people I've talked to have had the experience of spending money in a situation in which they were really happy to spend that money. And that's what I want all my clients to experience, that when they're paying me, they're saying, yes, I'm getting so much value for this.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you handle, like when you're coaching somebody, I'm sure everybody kind of has to unlearn, or a majority of people have to unlearn that mentality of, they have a service, they want to help serve, they want to help provide a service to the world, but they can flesh that out and get that structure up and going. But then once it's time to actually interact with a prospect or talk to the audience, there's usually a lot of unlearning that has to take place before that they feel comfortable being able even to ask anything that might be close to their value.
Yeah, it does take some practice, and part of it is helping people connect with, what's the intersection of the thing that they do best, that they most enjoy, that provides a service to the world, and that can also be their economic engine. And so when you develop an offering that you're so excited about, that's like 3/4 of the work right there. And then reframing like, no, you're not a job beggar. You're a resource person. You're here to offer something that could contribute to their needs. So maybe the first couple are the hardest, the first couple enrollment conversations or sales conversations. And when I do an enrollment conversation, when somebody's thinking about becoming my client, there's a mindset that's critical, which is that I'm not there to get a new client. I'm not there to make a sale. I'm there to be of service to this other person. And then at the end of the call, whether they've bought or whether they haven't bought, the measure for me is to what extent did I feel like I was able to contribute to them within the context of this enrollment conversation. If I'm trying to land the sale, then I'm having the conversation with some tension, and they'll pick up on that. If my intention is really to have their highest interest in mind, then they'll pick up on that whether or not they end up buying from me. So I've had people have an enrollment conversation and never buy, but give me the feedback like, that was transformative, that was amazing. I've had people have that conversation with me and never buy, but then they recommended 3 other people who did become clients. So it's really about the relationship.
And it sounds like you've been able to have kind of, especially owning your own business and owning your own brand, the flexibility to be able to kind of, I don't know, trust that things will work out, just like how you described, where even if that individual didn't purchase, that they recommend it because of how great of an experience they had. And so there's a return on a grander scheme of things. And but when you have like a set product or a set figure or service that you're really trying to exchange for, can we hone in on like how you can ask for what you're worth?
So could you define the question a little more clearly?
Yeah. So I love helping people. It's something that gives me a lot of joy and fulfills my purpose. I would gladly just help people all day and not ask for anything in return.
Right.
But just the way that this system's set up,
yeah.
Like I have to make an income in order to provide for my family, community, and et cetera. Mm-hmm. So that component is what was really difficult, and it kind of felt unnatural to like insert into this purpose of providing a service to the world that I've really put a lot of work into, and just kind of want to learn more about your view on how it is that we are able to ask for our worth.
Yeah, well, that's a huge conversation. So I had a big aha during a client meeting when I was sitting with this client and she was hanging on every word that I said. And whenever we met, she would do all her assignments. She did absolutely everything diligently. And then we'd come back together and she had completed the work she said she was going to do. And she got so much out of that coaching relationship. She was paying me $200 an hour, and we only met for 90 minutes a month. So, we'd meet for 90 minutes. She'd cut me a check for $300, but she was hanging on every word that I said. And the aha that I had was, if I were charging her $50 an hour instead of $200 an hour, she just wouldn't be as invested. So sometimes it's not about the money itself. It's about the fact that I want my clients invested. I want them to have skin in the game. And I want it to be something where they're going to get more out of it because they're putting more of themselves in it. There are other ways to get people's commitment and investment that's not monetary. We can leave that for a different conversation. But that's part of it. Is we have phobias, we have fears, we have insecurities, we have stories about, oh, nobody will pay that, or, oh, if I ask for money, it means I'm greedy, and things like that. So that's why reframing money is such an important piece. So for me, money is not good or bad. Money is neutral. It's a tool. I can use money to burn down a house and hurt people, or I can use I can use fire to burn down a house and hurt people, or I can use fire to light a bunch of candles and read an awesome novel by that candlelight. So money is similar. The founder of permaculture design, which is an ecological design system for working with nature rather than against nature, he talks about money as being for the landscape. Money being for social systems what water is to the landscape. So money is like becomes the transporter of information and nutrients, and that facilitates that flow and that exchange, like water does to the landscape. And similarly, it's not about more, because then you end up with a flood where a flood isn't natural. It's about how do you maximize the productive use of this energy between when it enters and leaves a system. So for me, money, I need the revenue to sustain the message. And at a certain point, the revenue becomes a yardstick for the impact that you're having in the world. It's no longer about the money. It's really about the impact. So asking for what you're worth, well, that's really subjective. What you're worth. Somebody might say, my time is priceless, right? How could I sell my time? I've got to charge at least $100,000 an hour. Well, good luck with that. Who's going to pay you $100,000 an hour? So unless you're offering something that is at that level of value and your audience can afford it. So, there's some rules of thumb that I've learned for what to ask. When you start working on high-end packages, you start at a lower level and then you raise your rates over time. But so much of it is that mindset of, I'm offering something really valuable here. The other thing is that if I've created this medicine and I call it cure-all medicine, and you're suffering from a headache, and the guy next door is offering headache relief, are you going to go for headache relief, or are you going to go for cure-all medicine, even if the cure-all medicine will cure your headache? So a lot of it has to do with defining who you serve, what you do for them, based on what their needs are, what their pain points are. So really that question of niche and making sure that what you're offering is providing tremendous value to this audience, because it's so targeted. You have a headache, I have headache relief. It's that specific. Then it's a lot easier to ask for your value. So my goal with my clients is that they're receiving 10 times what they paid. That's usually my goal.
Awesome.
And there are some rules of thumb, some, around how to price packages that might be beyond the scope of this call. Yeah. But ultimately, it really does come down to, do I value myself? Do I value what I have to offer? Do I value my time? And can I invite this person to invest at a higher level so that they're committed, so that they have skin in the game? And as a result, they're probably going to get more out of it.
That's really helpful. I really like the 10 times the value that you're providing. Because I just naturally fall into that category because of how much I love to give. And I also came from a path of 10 years ago. I hated money. I thought money was the root of all evil.
Yeah.
and that it was the reason why there's greed in the world. And so
Yeah.
I I actually remember quitting my job, and I was going through my trust the universe phase, and I was like, I'm just gonna not work, and I'm gonna trust that things are gonna work out. And I lived that way for like over a year, and magically money showed up. I was always fed. I just kept my rule of thumb was never turn down any work that came my way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was a really good lesson for me. But still, I still had that like money is evil mentality. That only in the last 5 years have I really changed my view of that. So it was really helpful.
And the Bible doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. The Bible says that love of money is the root of all evil. And if we look at how many times the Bible has been translated, going back to, Hebrew and Aramaic, it's like, you get the gist, right? It's like the attachment, the greed, the obsession with money.
Yeah.
But, money itself is a neutral tool.
Yeah.
And our society is way too complicated for me to take my chickens to the store to pick up a six-pack. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's what you do with it.
And it amplifies who you are. So if you're already generous, more money, you're going to be more generous. If you're already like contracted and fearful, it's going to amplify that.
Yeah, I can totally detest that for sure.
Attest to that?
Attest to that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So you mentioned like kind of high-end products, and here at AUTONOMY, we are really giving, like you said, 10 times the value for that. Yet we've priced our course at $10,000, and typically when we are letting interested parties know about that 10 times value, we still run into that huge wall that of when we let them know the price. Everybody kind of freezes when they hear a large number, but that's really subjective. There's a lot of people that do self-development courses, and I know Tony Robbins can be really expensive. I heard of a guy spending $30,000 a month being trained by Tony Robbins. He ended up not even being trained by Tony Robbins, but being trained by people that have been trained by Tony Robbins. But $30,000 a month, he saw the value in that. So really it's subjective. How can we communicate during that sales call and run into these really big emotions during the conversation and help the prospect move through those emotions and also our own?
Yeah. Well, I structure my sales calls in a very specific way. And so first we're looking at the dream, the vision, where they want to end up. And then we look at, okay, where are they now? And what are they struggling with? Where are they stuck? And then we look at the gap between the two. And that's usually where the anxiety starts to come up, or the fear. Or if they see a price and they're like, uh-oh. So, one of the pieces of my background is I'm a certified trainer in a process called nonviolent communication, which I know you're aware of, Joshua. And one of the elements within nonviolent communication is the practice of empathy, which is how do you offer a respectful understanding or a compassionate understanding for what's going on for the other person. So rather than try to convince them or try to argue with them or reason with them first, instead, the first thing I do is I just want to acknowledge what they're going through. I just acknowledge what's there, and I help them feel heard and understood. One thing to be extra clear about is that this practice of nonviolent communication, or NVC, is not about getting people to do what I want them to do. So this is not a manipulation technique to get them to buy. It's about making a connection, a human-to-human connection, and they can feel heard. Now, there are a couple pieces here that feed into how this fits into a sales conversation. One of them is nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So by telling the person back something like, it sounds like you're feeling some anxiousness when you see the price because you have some pressures in your life, including your children's college education. Like, let's say they just mentioned that, and I'm just acknowledging and I'm helping them feel understood. Once they feel heard, then I can come back with traditional coaching questions like, well, what would be the cost to you personally if you didn't do this program? Or what would be the cost to you professionally if you didn't learn how to do sales calls, for example? So we can start to ask them other questions to explore it or to think about it, or I can start to answer objections, but I usually only do that after I've empathically demonstrated that I get where they're coming from. The other piece is the KLT factor, which is a term I learned from one of my business coaches, Bill Barron. KLT stands for know, like, and trust. And the more you can build KLT factor with your audience, the better it's going to go, because people love to do business with people they know, like, and trust. And so by demonstrating that I'm trying to get what my potential client is going through, I'm developing more KLT factor, regardless of whether they buy on this call or not. I'm developing more trust, more rapport, and they may recommend me to 5 other people who buy just based on that KLT factor.
To kind of put a magnifying glass on your first aspect, the empathy part, what are some of those kind of little hints that they're having like a big emotional reaction, and it kind of sounded like you were using like a say back to them what you think that they're experiencing. Can you expand a little bit on like what that looks like? And
so the first part, how can I tell if they're having a big emotional reaction? Sometimes I have signals ahead of time, like there's a long pause, there's silence, and my curiosity gets piqued. I wonder if something's coming up. And then I can give it space and time to confirm or not that something's coming up. You just did it with your body language. You said, what if something's big is coming up? And you did the motion like that. If I have access to body language, tone of voice, that can tell me a lot. I can hear more tension in their voice. Sometimes it might just be an audio call, so I don't have access to their body language. But usually it's in the words that they're using, the tone of voice, the objections that they raise. Empathy itself is something that is common to all human beings. It's like really being gotten, really being understood. And we all love it. We all love being heard and being understood and really deeply gotten. So most of the time, the practice of empathy, like for example, if I'm supporting a client, offering them emotional support, or it could be with a friend or a relative, essentially I'm just present. I'm just with them, with my whole being. And where my attention goes is not their story. I don't necessarily give their story a lot of weight, but I try to listen a little deeper to what's important to them at a deeper level. Like, what is it that they value, or what is it that they're yearning for in their heart? And so that's what I reflect back. So for example, if somebody says something like, yeah, well, I've got all these bills for my children's college. So what I can reflect back doesn't have to be the story of, and you've got all these bills. It can be something along the lines of what's important to them. So it could be something like, yeah, and I'm hearing that providing for your children's education is also a really high priority. How would, and I could follow it up with, how would being really confident and skillful in sales conversations, assuming that that's my offer, how could that impact your ability to provide for your children? So I can actually circle back around, like the very thing that their objection is, my offering might actually help them with that. So I can sometimes circle back to that.
I'm sure that's really helpful when you're building the know, like, and trust aspect of being able to just sit there with them and for them to feel a connection.
Yeah, for them to feel that connection and feel heard. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. You mentioned the people's stories. If you ask somebody how they're doing and they want to be really honest, they could go off for 10, 15 minutes, telling you all about the story of their day.
Yeah.
What are some ways to kind of hone in on not getting wrapped up into the story, but being able to really focus on staying with your connection with them instead of the la la land that can happen?
Well, so there are several parts of this. One is that, having a tool is one thing, being skillful with a tool is another. And so these are specific practices that we work with in NVC, or nonviolent communication, is how do you train your attention to, no matter what the other person is saying to you, you're able to tune into their needs or their values. So that's a skill that you can practice and then translate into how it works in a sales context. Similarly with, if somebody's going on and on in their story, how do I interrupt in a way that shows care and compassion? And there are two ways to do that. I can do that by expressing myself honestly, or I could do that through some form of empathy or asking a question. And so sometimes, for example, if I hear somebody repeating themselves, I tell myself that it's because they really want to be heard. And so sometimes I'll interrupt by saying, excuse me, could I tell you back what I'm hearing is important to you, just to make sure that I've gotten it? And then now that I've interrupted, usually they'll say yes. And then I can tell them back, so what I'm hearing is important to you is X, Y, Z. And they're like, oh yeah, which they already said 3 times, which tells me they really want to be heard. So one of the things I don't do hardly ever is say, I understand. Instead, I demonstrate understanding by telling them back what it was that I heard. So both the skill around interrupting, either with an empathic question or by sharing from the heart what's happening for me, and this ability to tune into their needs or their values, regardless of what they're saying to me. And by the way, this is a training that we offer to people who want to mediate conflicts and who want to help other people with their conflicts. Is how do you stand there in the face of blame, judgment, criticism, a verbal attack, and not hear blame, judgment, criticism, or verbal attack, but instead hear what's in the other person's heart, so that I'm not getting as defensive, I'm able to stand in a compassionate place, and I'm much more likely to defuse a potential conflict down the line. So those same skills do translate into business relationships, marketing, sales conversations. We just have to, adjust them slightly. But there are plenty of contexts in our daily lives in which we can develop these skills.
That sounds really valuable. Outside of just the kind of sales avenue, being a business owner, an entrepreneur, you have to have relationships with your employees, coworkers, business partners, and then your family. Like, do you have any wisdom on how to manage or how to improve those relationships when you run into hard conversations? Because usually when people kind of get triggered by a strong emotional reaction, the conversation ends. And if there's any sort of hierarchy to the relationship, it might not ever come back up.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's the skills that I've been talking about already, which is, how do I express what's true for me? How do I share my perspective in a way that's most likely to lead to understanding on the other person's part, and where I can express what's true for me in a way that's most likely to meet both our needs, not just mine or not just theirs, but both of ours, how to create that win-win. And then on the listening side, what I just described. So, if it's okay, I'd like to just give this a little context. I'm going to share my screen with you and show you a few slides here. So, I want to tell a story before I show you this whole image, but I had someone contact me who was looking for a business partner, and he came and met with me, and, I didn't think I was his business partner, but really nice guy. And at the end of our conversation, he said, Alan, I sold $30 to $40 million worth of consulting based on this one diagram. Would you like to see it? And I said, of course. And so he showed me this diagram. And afterwards, he said, you can share this with anyone you want. And by the way, this man's name is Mike Cook. He's got a great management website. He's also a professor in one of our local MBA programs here in the Northwest. And super generous guy. You know, he said, go for it, share this with anyone you want. So I'm going to share it with you. So he drew this pyramid, and I've done my own little version here on the computer. Now, at the top of the pyramid, there's some kind of results. And in order to get results, we have to take action. Otherwise, forget it. We're not, you know, we don't get results just sitting on the couch. I tried that, didn't work. So when we take action, it's like I'm stepping through a doorway. So opportunities are like doorways. I take action, step through the doorway, and I get some kind of result. In order to know what the opportunities are, I need to know what's possible. What are the possibilities even? And then here's the clincher, the punchline. The root of the pyramid, the base of the pyramid is the relationships. So if the relationship were negative, we're never going to have the conversations that are going to surface possibilities. If the relationship is positive, if it's on a good note, then there's every chance that we're going to have the conversations that are going to surface possibilities. And out of that, we'll identify viable opportunities. We can take action. We can take certain results. So this was a little bit of a tangent from your question, but you know, this just points to how absolutely essential the relationships are. And when the relationships start to go south, nothing else works. So I wanted to share that little piece.
No,
so
it's really valuable because that seems to work in each of our relationships.
Yeah. And it totally applies to business. Like I said, people love to do business with people they know, like, and trust. And it's a new paradigm for business. It's no longer the corporate world and you have to have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. In fact, now even corporations come up with funky spellings and things with lowercase letters in the middle of the word, or, you know, and so it's a different environment. And the thing I've really loved about the online space is that many of my competitors have actually become collaborators, because it's possible to do that online. My number one competitor in the online space for nonviolent communication education we actually have an affiliate relationship. So we co-promote each other's events, and when they make money, I make money. When I make money, they make money. So it kind of works out. There's a win-win, and we share each other's audiences.
Did you have to kind of break away from a scarcity mindset of that there wasn't enough clients kind of thing? Yeah.
And I also saw the sense in it, and it was exciting to see that, you know, they had access to a lot of people that I may or may not have access to, and vice versa. And how could we turn it into a win-win? And I happened to know the people there. See, the relationship was there. So that part's really important.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, at the bottom of that pyramid is relationship. Yeah. How important is the relationship with yourself in order to be able to have any sort of healthy relationship with others?
Yeah, so it's essential. I mean, that sounds like that's a total softball lob of a question, Joshua, because I tell myself that, you know, and I wish everybody listening to this really had it super, super, super clear that it's not very likely that I'm going to have a healthy relationship with others if I don't have a healthy relationship with myself. And there are a lot of ways in which this shows up. If I have a judgment of myself and I interpret that there's a judgment from outside that's the same as this judgment I have of myself, that's really excruciating. When I'm not as connected with myself, that gets in the way of being totally present. We were talking earlier about empathy. So it's really hard to give others empathy if I'm disconnected from myself. And also, to the degree that I have a healthy relationship with myself, then what I share, coming from a place of honesty, of being real with you, is going to be totally different if I'm connected versus if I'm not connected. So, you know, there are a couple exercises that I share with some of my clients. So I'll mention one. There's a 2-part exercise. The first part is, when you go home, draw a picture or do a collage, something creative, around the question, what would it look like if your relationship with yourself were a committed relationship? Because many people haven't thought about it that way, that they're stuck with themselves for the rest of their lives. So may as well make it a good relationship. You can't divorce yourself, even though some people try. So that's one piece, is what would it look like if your relationship with yourself were a committed relationship?
So like, how do you talk to yourself? How do you treat yourself?
Yeah.
What would you do for yourself?
Yeah, and doing it in picture form allows us to get out of the sort of rational cognitive part of the brain and get into a little bit more of a creative space. The part 2 of that exercise is look yourself in the mirror, and not just looking at your features in a vague way, but look yourself in the eye and say, I'm here for you. Like, you can count on me. This is a great exercise for that old saying, fake it till you make it. So I had a client who couldn't look herself in the eye. She did this exercise twice a day for weeks. And for the first week, she couldn't look herself in the eye. And eventually she was able to, and she was able to start to feel that sense of being there for herself. And absolutely essential. So we, our reactive parts, the parts of us that make assumptions, the parts of us that create a story and then believe the story without checking it out, the more conscious we become of these parts of us, the more we're able to kind of heal them or use them constructively or bring them under control so that they're not undermining our efforts in unconscious ways.
I can really see how beneficial getting clear with the relationship with yourself has on like your business, because if you couldn't look at yourself in the eye in the mirror like that, and then you're going out trying to sell a service to other people, trying to ask them to trust you, it would be a huge disconnect.
Yeah, self-trust really transmits. There's another piece to this too, which is that when I have business coaching clients and they go through my 9-step curriculum, the very, very, very first step is define your life purpose and the vision for your ideal life. Because there are plenty of people who are successful at business, but who are miserable. And we don't need any more of those around. So it's like, define your ideal life, and how can your business fit into your ideal life and support your ideal life? Then you'll never outgrow what you're doing, and you'll always be happy with what you're doing because you have this bigger picture in mind. So part of being self-connected is also allowing yourself to dream big, set your compass, set your direction, and go for it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It gets me up in the morning, that's for sure.
Yeah, awesome.
Can we talk a little bit more about like self-emotional management? Like, as you go through your day, you're going to run into people with horrible attitudes, people calling you names, injustice out in the world.
Yeah.
And there are reactions that take place inside our own bodies. And can you talk a little bit about like what happens if you choose to ignore those, stuff those, and what are some other solutions or strategies to be able to help?
Yeah, boy, this is also a huge topic, and there have been volumes and volumes written on this. There's several pieces to this. One of them is, in general, where are you putting your attention, and how are you kind of tuning your antenna, so to speak? So like, I have a gratitude practice because I want to create more of those things in my life, and I want to tune my dial to gratitude and to not take things for granted. And I find that it does impact how reactive I am in other situations. Now, I'm a big fan, as you know, of nonviolent communication. I'm also a big fan of Byron Katie. She's got a fantastic methodology for dissolving stressful thinking. So I can, whatever story I have that is resulting in this stress, I can bring this level of inquiry to really question it and look at it and see what's true for me in that moment. One of the things I don't want to do when I find myself emotionally reactive is to just try to stuff it, ignore it, sweep it under the rug. I hear a lot of people tell other people or tell themselves like to just let it go. And, you know, I've looked and looked, but I haven't found the let it go switch. I haven't, it's so much easier said than done. And there's a really fine line between transcending something or suppressing it. So sometimes people think they let it go, but really they just swept it under the rug. What happens when I have strong emotions that I stuff, it's like taking that strong emotion and I'm taking a straw and I'm blowing it into this balloon in my chest. And so I keep stuffing the feelings, and then this balloon is growing and I feel more and more and more pressure. And then sometimes I just explode. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people who have somebody in their life who's like really nice, really nice, really nice, really nice, really nice, and then they explode. And so as humans, we are dissipative structures. The most simple example is we eat, we poop, we eat, we poop. And the same is true for other kinds of energies, including emotion. So I need to be able to discharge and find healthy ways to discharge. Some of it could be physical, like just going outside and stomping and shaking. A very important practice within nonviolent communication is empathy. And empathy functions as a pressure release valve. So, for example, yesterday I had somebody call me who I'm on their list of empathy buddies, and he was about to blow up on someone, but instead of doing that, he took a time out and went on a walk and called me on the phone, and he was able to vent. I gave him a safe place to vent, and at the end, he was more connected with his needs and with what requests he might have of the other person, and there was less emotional charge, so he was able to go back to that conversation. So this is something I would like for all of us, is to have 3 to 10 people who we could call it a moment's notice to get this kind of emotional support that's just pure presence, not advice giving, not suggestions, not, yeah, you're right, he is a blah, 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 or she is a da, 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 not, you know, oh, let me tell you about my story, but just true presence. The other thing is that we can offer that to ourselves. And so along the lines of not stuffing the emotions, I can simply be present with myself. If I'm driving, I may need to pull over just so I can be extra present. If I'm very skilled at this, I could do it while driving. But at some point, just allow myself to just be with what's happening. And that might be on the surface level. That might be what Dr. Marshall Rosenberg really called a jackal show. I might be judging or dehumanizing others. But I just allow that to be a green lighted. And then I can start to go deeper, like, what's important to me in this situation? What am I really wanting? And allow myself to go deeper to the deeper values that are motivating the situation. So there are ways that we can give ourselves that support. Sometimes, Joshua, life is really tough, and the best option we have is mourning and grieving. And that's a real option that I think a lot of people don't consider. And what happens when I don't do my grief work is that I'm storing it in my tissues. We store this stuff in our body. And when I have unresolved grief, walking around with more heaviness, like a heavy heart, it's like there's a dark cloud over me. I'm not as present to the beauty of the natural world, not as present to the people around me. And it's uncomfortable, which is why we avoid it, grief work. But it's such a human thing. And when we allow ourselves to do our grief work, we're actually carving out more space inside us for more joy to come in later. So our capacity for joy is limited, or could be supported by our capacity for grief. So things happen in the world that are hard to see, hard to witness. We have difficult interactions. And how do we allow ourselves to do that grief work, get emotional support from others, give ourselves the emotional support that we need, assuming that we're able, or we have the skills, or we can commit ourselves to developing those skills. And then how can I come back to situations to either create repair, or to have a do-over, or do this kind of self-care before interacting in a situation, so that I don't create the situations that in the past I've regretted.
So it sounds like this emotional processing doesn't just give you like a happy day every day, but kind of the tools to be able to process and maneuver through the obstacles that the day brings.
Absolutely. And also, the process itself is like, for example, let's say that somebody called me a liar and I'm super irritated. Well, what's the opposite of a liar? Oh, somebody who tells the truth. Oh, they value honesty and truthfulness. So if I did tell a lie, it could be that my reaction is because I'm having a shame response that then I'm covering up by getting angry at them and blaming them for, it could be that. Or it could be that if I honestly didn't tell a lie and I don't remember that, but I'm still feeling irritated, as soon as I connect with their need instead of their judgment of me, like the judgment was they called me a liar. But if I connect with their deeper need, it's like, oh, they value honesty, they value truthfulness. That's a value I also share. Now I'm taking it less personally because there's something important for them. I don't have to get as bent out of shape. Yes, we have a different experience of what happened. We may have a different story. But if I get really uppity in their face, they're less likely to be able to hear my version of it. So by giving myself that emotional care, I get more clarity about even what request I might have in that situation. So I might be able to give them empathy for their experience and then come back and be able to clarify. Well, this is how I experienced it and what happened. And I've resolved dozens and dozens and dozens of conflicts by connecting with empathy and honesty and allowing myself to get curious about what's happening with the other person instead of just taking their judgments at face value. So that's another quality that's really important if we don't want our emotions to get in the way of the positive work we want to do in the world is curiosity. Get curious about yourself and get curious about what might be happening for the other person instead of listening to their judgments.
Mm. We were able to watch your demonstration with the tube and the two scarves and being able to make sure that the tube's clear before the communication is able to come through.
Right.
That was really, really helpful to conceptualize. And you mentioned jackal. Would you mind taking a moment just to explain what the giraffe and jackal metaphors are?
Oh, yeah. These are metaphors that we use in nonviolent communication teaching. Part of the issue is that the word nonviolent communication, the name of the process nonviolent communication, is somewhat unsatisfactory because it comes from Gandhi's social movement of nonviolence. But Gandhi was really talking about truth-telling and compassion. But the words that they were using in Hindi did not have a direct translation. So it became known as nonviolence. And Marshall Rosenberg wanted to align himself with Gandhi's movement of nonviolence, is why he called nonviolent communication. So it has other names: compassionate communication, empowered communication, conscious communication, empathic communication. It has a bunch of names. And one of them is, people call it giraffe language. And it's because we have these metaphors of the giraffe and the jackal. Now they're teaching tools, but they're also a little bit dangerous because people can take them too seriously or treat them too rigidly. The idea of the giraffe is one of the land animals with the largest heart. And it has a perspective that anytime I meet my needs at the expense of somebody else's needs, in the long run, my needs will not be met. Anytime I create a win-lose, in the long run, I also lose. So in nonviolent communication, we're aiming for a win-win outcome or a mutually agreeable or mutually enriching outcome. The metaphor of the jackal is that, the idea of it is that it's an animal that's close to the ground and it kind of has blinders and it can only see its own needs but isn't concerned with the needs of others. And we need to keep in mind, one, that these are just human-centered projections. These are our metaphors. They don't really have anything to do with the real animals out there. And the second thing is that we want to hold them lightly because I don't want to start thinking that there are people who are jackals and people who are giraffes, and then I'm using them in a way that's judging and putting other people in a box or pigeonholing them. And then I'm going really against the principles of the process known as nonviolent communication.
Thanks for explaining that. That's really helpful.
Well, and one of the things I've discovered, Joshua, is that there's such a thing as giraffe marketing and jackal marketing.
What? Can you explain this?
Well, yeah. And they have certain very specific characteristics. So jackal marketing is what most of us are familiar with that we don't like. Messages that are manipulative, that tell you if you eat at McDonald's, then you will have friends. And they're trying to kind of manipulate you or coerce you or play on your fears to get you to buy the thing that maybe you don't even really need. Giraffe marketing, on the other hand, which is, again, I'm borrowing the metaphor from nonviolent communication, is about empathy. In other words, I want the receiver, I want the reader of my marketing messages to be like, oh my gosh, he gets me. So my marketing messages need to be full of empathy for my audience so that they can see themselves in my message and be like, wow, this person really understands me. So that's one piece. Giraffe marketing is also about being of service. It's not about selling you something that's not a good match for you. But it's about, yeah, I have something that's really valuable here that could really, really help you. So giraffe marketing is about helping you connect with how your needs would be fulfilled when you interact with my offering. So I need to be, in classical marketing, we call them the benefits. How can I make it really clear how your needs will be met when you interact with my offering? So there's no manipulation, there's no like artificial scarcity involved, and there's no coercion. I know some marketers are like in this gray area where they're like, well, it's okay to manipulate or coerce because the end result, they're going to love it. I'm agnostic on 10% of those cases, but most of them, I think that backfires. Mm-hmm. So those are some, that's where I come up with, jackal and giraffe marketing.
That's great. That really aligns with what we've been learning in the course, and
cool.
That 10 times value, like you just want to really be able to put out something that's great because it has a good chance of being successful.
The more your clients' needs are met, the more your business is going to thrive.
And they'll come back.
And they'll be your number one marketing team. When your clients, customers, students are your number one marketing team, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like not that long ago, I went back to see if my assistant had put some of the testimonials up on the page, and I literally cried. It was so moving seeing some of what people had written, and it's because their needs were really, really fulfilled. So that's what you want, is you want testimonials that can put you in tears because of how awesome they are.
Yeah. Yeah. Just from knowing your work, what's the most powerful aspect regarding communication? My guess is that it's one part empathy, but is being honest another aspect, and how does that look in a business relationship?
I would say the most powerful aspect of communication that people don't think of as an aspect of communication, but the most powerful aspect of communication that can impact all relationships, including business relationships, is summarized as know thyself. So that's really, and that goes back to your early question around self-connection. So even before honesty or empathy, if I'm disconnected from myself, the other two don't matter as much. Or if I don't even know what's going on for me, then who cares how honest I am? It's like, well, Joshua, I really am not connected with myself, and I don't know what's going on with me. That I can be that honest. So really, knowing yourself and having done some of your own personal work is probably like one of the biggest leverage points. One of the things I do professionally is I facilitate meetings, and that happens to be the number one factor for effective meetings that I found is the maturity of the people in the meeting. So now as far as, honesty and empathy, I don't see any one as more important than the other. It's really being able to be fluid in the flow between the two, having the skillfulness to be able to switch from listening mode to self-expression to coming back to the listening mode. But if we're going to get into honesty at all, it's like people can tell when you're lying. Like most people have a pretty good bullshit detector, and that erodes trust, and people will not want to do business with you. So even when you think the other person will be uncomfortable, or especially when you think the other person will be uncomfortable, without any mean-spiritedness, without trying to hurt anybody, but just being honest about how you see things actually builds trust, builds safety and connection. So that's a huge piece is being able to be vulnerable in the sense of real. But it's really about having this fluidity between the empathy, the honesty, and the self-connection. I think that's where the real gift lies, is being able to switch your attention at will between those three areas.
Yeah, thanks for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm.
And we do role plays exercises here in Autonomy, and we're oftentimes doing a role play of talking to a prospect, someone that's interested in the Autonomy class, and so we're going through the whole spiel. And one of our jobs is to qualify them, because we don't want to, of course, have somebody spend their money on a course that they're not going to put forth the time or the energy, and then want to try and get a refund out of us. It's
a pain in the butt for any company to have to issue refunds, and you don't want people who are not happy with what you're offering. Yeah.
Do you have any advice on, that was kind of what I was bringing up the honesty about, of like how to be assertive into qualifying your audience, and to not press too hard on them, but to be able to like be firm.
When it's not a good match, you mean?
Yeah, and just being able to ask those hard questions, knowing that like they might not be a good fit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's your question exactly? How do I express honestly what's going on for me if I think that they're not a good match?
Yeah, and maybe I guess how to be assertive.
How to be assertive, boy. How to be assertive. I guess there's probably a lot of flavors of assertiveness, and some of it has to do with personal style. And then there's cultural factors. I mean, even East Coast, West Coast in the US, assertiveness looks really different. So I don't think of it so much as being assertive as I think of it as being clear. So, and sometimes if I'm needing to assert myself, if I'm needing to push to get my message out there, maybe it's that the other person hasn't felt heard. So I may need to, it's a little bit like the martial art of Aikido. I may need to allow a little bit this way before I come back with what it is that I have to share. And yeah, you know, I had to do that once when I told someone, you know, honestly, the thing that you want to do, I've never worked with anybody who does that. And my coaching is geared toward people who offer services rather than products, and you're offering a product. So it sounds intriguing to work with you, but I'm wondering if you could find a better match with someone who has experience specifically with what you're looking for. So I might say something like that.
That's helpful.
Yeah. What are some of the tough questions that you had in mind? I'm curious.
Well, can they afford $10,000?
Mm-hmm.
And like how to kind of bring that up without, like we really want to be able to help everyone with all means, but we also need to figure that out. And
so it sounds like part of the sales conversation is almost like discernment counseling, like helping them discern whether it's a good match for them or not. You know, in terms of the money, it's, you know, there's so many ways you can ask it, but just putting out there, you know, hey, for a lot of people, $10,000 is a really sizable sum. And I'm feeling hopeful based on our conversation that this might be a good match for you. But what reassurance can you give me that if you spend $10,000, it's not going to be super, super stressful for you and impact your ability to get the most out of the course?
Nice.
So that's one way I might ask it.
Yeah. I was very considerate. It was a very considerate way to ask.
Yeah, and just not saying like, hey, can you really afford it? Or, you know, do you have to borrow? Not my business, right? To micromanage their finances. You know, the other piece that a lot of people don't realize, and maybe this is part of autonomy, is that my audience doesn't need to be rich in order to buy my high-end services. They just need to want it badly enough. Because if we're talking about their car radiator, somehow they're going to come up with the money. So why not this?
Yeah.
So a lot of it has to do with, to what extent is it a priority for them? And most people, if they want it badly enough, they'll figure out a way to come up with the money. But we do want to make sure that it's a good match so that we don't have even more uncomfortable conversations down the line. Now, one of the things I do and that I've been doing kind of in a stepway fashion is is almost like a pre-qualifying before we even have the sales conversation. And so there are lots of ways that people can do that. So for example, right now my consultations are free. It used to be you could just sign up. Now you can't just sign up. You need to fill out an application. So that raises the bar just a little bit. They need to fill out this whole application before they can even pick a date and time and sign up for a call. But you can increasingly raise the bar to make the entryway a little narrower each time. So one of the things I'm considering is not offering free consultations anymore, but actually offering paid consultations, because that's going to further narrow the audience to people who are even more committed and more interested.
Nice.
Yeah.
Something that we are constantly running up to in our role plays is with the high ticket costs, that they need to talk to their partner or their spouse before making any sort of decisions.
Yeah.
And sometimes we might like ask them if to reschedule and to bring their partner onto the call in order to be able to address any of their concerns.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you have any other like ideas on how to strategize that?
Well, the first thing I want to do is I want to give them empathy. I want to give them some understanding, right? Like, I get it. We don't make $10,000 decisions in my household just unilaterally. I don't know anybody who's married who does, unless they're like ultra rich and both spouses have their own like big nest egg, or they're totally disconnected. They don't even check in with each other about basic stuff anyway. So yeah, I like the strategy of rescheduling and then having their partner come on board. There's so many reasons why it makes sense to try to get someone to say yes in the conversation. One of them, for example, a lot of the work that I do in the consultation, people get connected to what many of us might call their higher self. They get really excited. They get tapped into this clarity of like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I need for my long-term trajectory, for like my life. So many things haven't been working, and this is exactly the thing. They have this moment where the clouds part and they're just clear. And then they get off the call, and then all the fears kick in, and they shut down and they get contracted. And it's like, oh no, what about this? What about that? And then their fear, they end up talking themselves out of it when on the call they were so clear. So that's another thing that happens for people is they kind of chicken out based on their lowercase s self, their fears and their contracted self. So, I want to give people the empathy and I want to give people the honesty. One thing I don't do well, Joshua, one thing I'm really bad at is hard sales. Some people have the personality where they can really push somebody and they can do it in a way that's really skillful and it doesn't cause any offense for anybody. That's not something that comes naturally to me. So I tend to give people more space to make those decisions. And I realize that may have cost me thousands of dollars in my business. Mm-hmm. At the same time, whether it's my personality type or my family or cultural background, whatever it is, when I experience hard sales, like a hard sell, it's such a turnoff. Now I don't even care if the product or service is good for me or if it's what I really need or want. Now there's a turnoff. Now I have a judgment about the salesperson. And now I lost my brand crush. Like the whole, I went to Seattle and did a test drive on a Tesla. Awesome car.
Yeah.
I lost my I lost my brand crush because the salesman was such a doofus. So we'll just leave it at that. So that's a big thing is that that's just me, that's like a personality piece on my part is, I tend to not want to push people but I like the idea of having their spouse come back, just simply rescheduling the call. Yeah. Sometimes you could ask them, you could try to get clear. Do they really need to ask their spouse, or is this just an excuse?
Yeah, yeah.
And so then
is that somewhere you might interject with some honesty, some hard honesty?
Well, I might ask them some more questions. So I might say first some empathic understanding and then some questions. So it might be something like, yeah, I absolutely understand that with something at this scale, you want your spouse on board and you want their buy-in, and having their support will be really important for your success in this course. I get that. So, but let me understand some things first. If you were to rate on a scale of 1 to 10, how important this course is for you at this time in your life, like, help me understand that. Where is it on a scale of 1 to 10, how important this course is for you? So now I'm starting to give them questions that they can ask themselves for that conversation with their spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So help me understand, if you didn't do this course now, is there something else in the near run, or do you think you might really be missing out on something? Like, are you going to set yourself back a year before you come back and are looking for this again? Well, like, how important is it for you to really try to get your spouse on board? Or does it feel to you like kind of like, take it or leave it? So I want to get a sense of, I want to help them. Part of what I want to do, Joshua, is I want to help them connect with how important this is to them, so they bring that to the conversation with their spouse.
Yeah, because the interest, the passion, the desire, that's, I think, what will really transmit to the spouse, and might show her an aspect that she hasn't seen in her husband for a while. Or,
well, the fact is that if they have the money in the bank, it's really all going to swing on the spouse who I just had the sales conversation with. Because if the other spouse shows objections, okay, so let's say that the other spouse shows objections, but the person that I had the call with, the importance level of this offering to them is a 2. They're going to cave to their spouse's objections because it's not that important to them. But if their importance level is 8, 9, or 10, they can likely persuade the other partner. They can likely really get the other partner to see how important it is to them. But for some reason, and we've been looking at the importance of relationships, for some reason, it could be really valuable for them to get their spouse's buy-in before they pull the trigger, so to speak, on buying the course. So I have a lot of compassion for that, for wanting to talk to the spouse first. And I want them to go into that conversation fully connected with like how huge this would be for them to take this particular program, for example.
That's great. Thanks for that insight.
Yeah.
I really want to respect your time. If you need to go right now, I totally understand. If you have a couple more minutes, there any other aspects that how business and communication come up?
Sure. Yeah. We scheduled an additional 10 minutes, so I think we have a little more time.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, there are just so many. It's just hard to know where to go because there's the whole fact that when you're an entrepreneur, you start out most of the time as a solopreneur,
mm-hmm.
and then you get to the point where, like I found myself at this point several times, where I can't afford a team and I can't afford not to have a team. So how do you do team building, and how do you show up as a leader? Because now I'm spending more of my time managing people than doing the work itself.
Mm.
And I had a hard enough time before prioritizing my own to-do list, and now I need to tell other people what their priorities are going to be in the business. So there's the whole know thyself, and personal growth is such a big part of how you show up as a leader. And part of it has to do with just different paradigms of leadership and how I communicate with my team. So like that could be an aspect we could explore. Another aspect, like you said, is the marketing and sales piece. Another aspect is just how do I transmit my ideas and frameworks for putting my story out there that are really enrolling and really make sense, so I can leverage my story for how I bring people in. Another has to do with just the written word, and how when I'm writing, what are the things that I'm keeping in mind so that my writing is really powerful and succinct and clear. So yeah, they're just all these different dimensions of it, but it just brings me back to the pyramid that we looked at earlier. It's like, that's really the foundation. I'm not going to have these positive relationships without a certain level of competency with communication skills. So in order to be a good writer, not everybody needs to be Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. So you just need a sufficient competency. Anyway.
That's helpful.
That's what comes up just initially. But yeah, I mean, it's really all about communication, and it starts with how I communicate with myself, my own connection with myself. Yeah.
What's your favorite aspect of being an entrepreneur?
One is the creativity. So I get to decide what I'm going to offer, how I'm going to offer it, how long, when the sessions are. There's just so much, which goes hand in hand with the autonomy. I have so much autonomy, control. I have a say in what I do, when I do it, how I do it, which can be pretty scary for some people and pretty anxiety inducing. And there's so much plus side to it. So that flexibility and freedom is huge for me. Also, my results are directly connected to my efforts. I'm not just clocking in and clocking out and doing somebody else's agenda and creating benefits and results for people that I never get to see. So that's another piece. Another piece is that my income ceiling is really unlimited, which doesn't occur really in almost any employment situation. I'd love to tell the story someday. I want to create a short telecourse called "How I Made $8,000 in 3 Weeks," which is a true story that happened this is years ago, when I looked at my bills and I looked at my bank account and I was like, does not reconcile. I did not have enough money to pay my bills, and I freaked out. And in 3 weeks, I had made $8,000. So, and there's a specific how to, So, yeah.
Having the freedom to test and to take that
having
chance.
The freedom to test, but also there just is no ceiling on my income capacity.
So who's the biggest limitation, or what is?
Well, I'm my own biggest limitation by far.
Yeah.
I do have a small team that helps me, and personally, one of my growing edges is basic self-care, as basic as getting enough sleep at night, as basic as staying hydrated. Sometimes I get so focused at work, I forget to eat lunch, and then it's 4 p.m. and I'm super cranky, and I'm snarling at people. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot to eat lunch. So those are some of my personal growing edges. It's just some of that real self-care 101, really. It's almost embarrassing to admit to it, but that's really some of it. When I eat well, when I've got enough exercise, when I'm hydrated, when I then I'm showing up at a whole other level. So that's huge. There's another piece here. One of my favorite tools as a business person is David Allen's book, Getting Things Done. That book changed my life.
That was a requirement in the beginning of our course.
Yeah. So things like that. It's wonderful to do coaching and to, some of the stuff I do, the first step in my process around life purpose and vision. You bring people up to 80,000 feet, they can get a real big overview. But if they're not efficient at how that translates into projects and then to do items, emails, phone calls, conversations, then the works get all gummed up. So super valuable to have GTD.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, there are lots of aspects. Right now we're in my office at my home, and I think you're in your office at your home. So yeah, the commute is sweet.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said of it, and I need to be completely honest and kind of vulnerable about it. That for years it was a struggle, and yes, the struggle was totally worth it. But I had savings that I totally burned through. It super stressed out my marriage, and it can be really hard. So being an entrepreneur is simultaneously one of the hardest things I've ever done and one of the most fulfilling. And my business is now to the point that I'm turning clients away. I have people that I send my overflow clients to, and now I'm confident that if I need to generate cash flow, I can get new clients. I can generate a course and create cash flow. So there's this confidence now that comes with it that took years to get to this point. But that diligence, that persistence has totally paid off. And part of it is just because I believe so much in myself, and I believe so much in what it is that I offer. So that's important too. I think somebody really needs to believe in what they're offering. if you don't believe in your offer, find a different offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 10 times value is a great goal.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been really valuable information, not only for myself, but I know the autonomy class is going to enjoy this as well.
Cool.
We hope to have you back with us, perhaps for a live question and answer, and
That sounds fun.
And perhaps a role play, being able to just show us your high level communication skills in a business situation.
Yeah, that sounds really fun too.
Do you have any current courses or offerings that the audience could learn more about or sign up for?
My goodness, I'm teaching a course in May, actually titled How to Find Your Life Purpose and Create the Vision for Your Ideal Life, where I'm walking people through that process. And I don't have a URL I can give you in this moment because we haven't officially opened that course, but that's coming up in May. And
do you have a website?
CascadiaWorkshops.com. Cascadia is the bioregion that you and I live in, and it's spelled CASCADIA. So it's a tip of the hat to the bioregionalism movement. CascadiaWorkshops.com. So that's my main website. I'm speaking to the UN in May, but that's not something I can invite people like, come watch my talk at the UN. And all sorts of things coming up in the fall. But yeah, I've got other engagements already all the way through the summer. So the next courses I'll be doing, besides this one in May, will probably be in the fall.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to contact you and see if they would be a good fit for one-on-one, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, through the website. My email is Alan, ALAN, at CascadiaWorkshops.com. Or if you go to that URL, CascadiaWorkshops.com/session, SESSION, that's where I offer people a no-cost 1-hour conversation just to see whether or not we're a good match for working together. And it's not a free coaching call. It's really this exploration of like, what are you up to? And how can my gifts contribute to that or support you? How can I blow wind in your sails to help you, achieve that dream? But that's so CascadiaWorkshops.com/session is where people can sign up for this 1-hour no-cost consultation. Well,
fantastic. Alan, thanks so much again for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you to Joshua, and thank you to Richard also for this opportunity to be able to happen.
Yeah, fantastic. Hope to see you inside of the autonomy class. I'm going to send you a link so you can check it out and see what we're all about. But really look forward to the follow-up question and answer.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Joshua.
All right. Thanks again, Alan. Bye.
Bye.